Hi, welcome to our PowerPoint on constitutional principles. If you have not already done so, please make sure that you have your slide guide ready, as well as a pencil and a highlighter. We'll be using both throughout the presentation. First things first, let's make sure we all have a basic definition of principle, since it's a word we're going to be using a lot. A principle is a basic guiding rule or idea. Please add that to your slide guide right now. You should have added it right next to the picture on the first slide of your slide guide. This slide guide will be sort of like a guided presentation. There'll be areas where you'll have to add notes. There'll be things that we discuss or that I ask you to highlight so that when you go back to study from this, not just for the quiz next week, but also in our future units when we come back to the Constitution, you have a really nice, organized breakdown. So a little background on the U.S. Constitution here. And you should be using your homework to see if you can answer these questions as we go through it. When exactly was the Constitution ratified? Take a look at your homework. If you had 1791, you'd be correct. Let's add that in on our notes here. This document ultimately lays the foundation for the United States. It becomes, as you can see on the right here, it becomes sort of a rallying cry, we the people. We're going to come back to that concept of the people a lot this year. So please add foundation in the spot that it is missing. Why was this so revolutionary for the time period? Take a look at your homework again. What made this so different from all of the previous governments that maybe the Founding Fathers had seen, had been subject to? At the time it was written, it represented a change from the old systems. What did those old systems look like? If you said old autocratic systems, you would be correct. Let's add that in. I make a mental note. Remember, autocracy is a word that you have for types of government that we've covered and that you'll need to know for next week. It's the same words, changed slightly though, obviously. It's a different, excuse me. It's a different use of the same concept. Autocratic systems, a single ruler with complete control. And if you feel the need to add that here now, you can do that as well. Single ruler with complete control. Let's turn our slide guide page now to our second page, and let's break down what this document structure kind of looks like. So first off, the entire document is organized into different sections. The first section is the preamble, gives you kind of a brief overview, the purpose of why it was written, who wrote it. Then you have, followed by that are the 7 articles. In our course this year, we're actually only going to focus truly on the first 3 articles, and we'll break those down a little bit later in the year. We'll come back to each one separately and delve further into it. And then, of course, there are the 27 amendments that are part of the Constitution as well. So on our sheet here, we're going to use our highlighter, and we're going to highlight some portions of our image. So the first thing that we want to highlight under preamble is simply purpose of the Constitution. Could highlight more, but we really don't need to. The preamble is giving the purpose of the Constitution. So take a moment to highlight that. Now let's take a look at Article 1 here. What exactly is going on in Article 1? Article 1, you can see here, creates the legislative branch of the U.S. government, which includes the House of Representatives and the Senate. Together they are called the Congress. Now, I said we are going to break this down more fully later in the year, so for now, let's just highlight all that we really need to know is that it creates the legislative branch. So we're going to highlight that. The rest of it are details that we'll come back to later. So we're looking at, in Article 1, 2, and 3, creating the structure of the U.S. government here. And so far in Article 1, we've seen the legislative branch. Now let's jump down to Article 2. Under Article 2, it says that it created the executive branch of the government and gives executive power to the president. So for here, again, we're just going to highlight creates the executive branch. We only need to know the bare bones at this point of this document and these articles. Like I said, we'll be coming back to it later. And if we jump down to Article 3, creates the judicial branch of the government consisting of the Supreme Court and any inferior courts Congress creates. Again, we're just going to highlight creates the judicial branch for now. Ultimately, though, as you can see, Article 1, 2, and 3 really do, as we said, set up the structure of the government. And that government is divided into 3 branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. Now, what's interesting about each of these branches is that they are assigned a set of power, and because of the structure in which the founders used, they wanted to make sure that each branch also had a little bit of control over the other branches, what we'll later discuss as sort of checks and balances on each other. They did not want any one to become too powerful. So let's fill in our missing info there. All right, moving on to the rest of the document structure. While we won't be focusing on Article 4, 5, 6, and 7 in our year, it is good to have a general breakdown and a basic knowledge of what they entail. So Article 4 shows that and emphasizes that the U.S. is a group of semi-independent state governments. Article 4 makes sure that those states' governments actually play fair with one another. So let's fill in our missing word there of semi-independent. I'm sure many of you have heard before of the debates between states' rights and federal control. That's something that we'll talk about during the year, but we won't break down Article 4 the same way we break down the other articles. If you're interested, though, in that, there are classes at the high school that you can explore that will break down civics even further than we'll get to this year. Article 5 talks about giving the Constitution the ability to be amended. So at the time of its creation, one of the concerns was that the government would be set in stone. It wouldn't be able to change and alter with the times. So what we have here is an article that gave the Constitution flexibility and pretty much just sort of eased the fears of everybody who was thinking of signing it and ratifying it. So let's fill in what we're missing there. Moving on to Article 6. The U.S. government would be powerless if states could overrule it being the Constitution, the government itself. So Article 6 makes sure that they can't. So we have in Article 4 the emphasis of the semi-independent states, and then in Article 6 we have a re-emphasis that federal control still holds sway over the independence, the independent-like nature of the states. So let's fill in what we're missing here. And then Article 7 just explains that the Constitution would be officially ratified when 9 states approved of it. And there you have our breakdown of the document that becomes the very famous U.S. Constitution. Now, within that document, there are a number of principles, guiding principles, that we're going to begin to discuss today. We're going to cover about 3 of them today, and then we'll fill in the rest tomorrow. First one we're going to start with is the concept of popular sovereignty. So take a moment, pause if you need to, and find that section of your homework on popular sovereignty. Okay, let's talk about sovereignty in general. Sovereignty is a term used for supreme power. So when we're talking about popular sovereignty, what are we discussing then? What would be our definition of popular sovereignty? Take a moment to look at your homework and think about it. If you said that popular sovereignty is a principle in which a government's power comes from the people, you would be correct. Another way of referring to that is that power comes from the populace. So think that those words clearly are very closely linked. You can see the start of it there.
Good morning, teachers. This is just a reminder that...
So if you said that popular sovereignty was a principle in which a government's power comes from the people or populace, you would be correct. Take a look at the words there, popular, populace. There's a connection between those two. You can see from the beginning of the word there. That's something that we want to make sure that we start to notice a bit more. Like autocracy and autocrat, there's a connection between those 2 words as well. That's just general conversation about, reading comprehension and working with those elements there. Populace meaning the population, right? So popular sovereignty is looking at the population of a people for their approval. And what exactly does that look like when we're talking about popular sovereignty and how it plays out in the U.S.? Take a look at your homework. How do the people show their approval or disapproval? If you said voting in representative government, you would be correct. Let's fill that in. Representative government, as we know, is one of our vocab words that we've covered so far this year. So please make a mental note of that as well. And if you need to write down what representative government means again right here, now's a good place to do that. And of course, we know that it means that citizens vote in representatives to make decisions within the government. So we can add that there now.